filed and look forward to getting pending in a short while. And this is an amendment, I think, which addresses many of the issues that we've been hearing about this morning that the American people are concerned about. This amendment helps us lower the record-breaking deficit that this country is facing, and this amendment will help us transform our energy system away from fossil fuel, away from the oil disaster that we're seeing in the Gulf right now, to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. So I think for all of my colleagues who are concerned about record-breaking deficits, I hope they'll support this amendment, which I will explain in a moment. And for all of my colleagues who understand that the future of this country is not offshore drilling, I hope they will support this amendment. Let me tell you very briefly what this amendment does. Mr. President, at a time when the profits of big oil companies are soaring, at a time when we are in the midst of the largest oil spill in our nation's history, one of the great ecological disasters that this country has ever experienced, at a time when we desperately need to end our dependence on oil and gas and seriously transform our energy system by investing in energy efficiency, conservation, and renewable energy, this amendment is simple and it's straightforward, and I think it addresses all of those concerns. This amendment simply repeals over $35 billion in tax breaks to the oil and gas industry. Let me repeat that. This amendment simply repeals over $35 billion in tax breaks to the oil and gas industry, all of which were recommended for elimination in President Obama's fiscal year 2011 budget. So what this amendment is doing is simply bringing to the floor of the Senate the recommendations that were in President Obama's budget. According to OMB, the repeal of these tax breaks would be equivalent to about 1% of domestic oil and gas industry revenues over the next decade. This is not an onerous attack on the oil industry. In other words, the cost to the oil and gas industry of repealing these tax breaks is now negligible. $25 billion of the money saved under this amendment would be used to reduce the deficit, and $10 billion would be used to invest in the highly successful energy efficiency and conservation block grant program over a 5-year period. So this amendment does two things. For all of my friends and every American who is concerned about a $13 trillion national debt and record-breaking deficits, this amendment says, let us put $25 billion into deficit reduction. For all of us who are concerned about transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, this amendment says over the next 5 years, let's put $10 billion into the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, which provides funding to states, cities, and towns all over America to begin transforming energy in their communities. Mr. President, this amendment is supported by Physicians for Social Responsibility, Friends of the Earth, Public Citizen, MoveOn.org, Center for Biological Diversity, One Sky, Environment America, the Sierra Club, and Greenpeace. If there is anything we should be learning from the Gulf disaster, the horrendous disaster that we're experiencing today in the Gulf Coast, it is that it is time to move aggressively away from polluting and unsafe fossil fuels, which are getting more and more difficult to produce as we move further and further offshore to drill for them. And with a $13 trillion national debt, the last thing we need to be doing is giving huge tax breaks to big oil and gas companies that have been making record-breaking profits year after year after year. As I indicated before, all of the oil and gas tax breaks that my amendment seeks to repeal have been targeted for elimination in President Obama's fiscal year 2011 budget. So here we are. For all of my deficit hawk friends, $25 billion into deficit reduction by asking the oil industry, which has been hugely profitable in recent years, to start paying their fair share of taxes. And let me quote from a speech that President Obama gave on this subject, and I quote, "Our continued dependence on fossil fuels will jeopardize our national security. It will smother our planet, and it will continue to put our economy and our environment at risk. If we refuse to take into account the full cost of our fossil fuel addiction, if we don't factor in the environmental costs and national security costs and true economic costs, we will have missed our best chance to seize a clean energy future. The time has come, once and for all, for this nation to fully embrace a clean energy future. Now that means rolling back billions of dollars of tax breaks to oil companies so that we can prioritize investments in clean energy research and development," end quote, President Barack Obama. And frankly, that is what this amendment is all about. Now let me just give you, Mr. President, one interesting example of the absurdity of continuing to provide tax breaks to the oil and gas industry. Last year, ExxonMobil, the most profitable corporation in the history of the world, reported to the SEC that not only did it avoid paying any federal taxes, it actually received a $46 million refund from the IRS. How's that, folks? So for all of the taxpayers in this country, people who are making $30,000 or $40,000 a year, who are prepared to pay their full share of taxes, we have a situation where last year ExxonMobil, the most profitable corporation in the history of the world, reported to the SEC that not only did it avoid paying any federal taxes, it actually received a $46 million refund from the IRS. Well, we got a lot of working people in the state of Vermont who make $50,000 or $60,000 a year, working 6-7 days a week in order to take care of their family. They pay taxes. ExxonMobil, the most profitable corporation in America, gets a refund from the IRS. And if anyone thinks that makes sense, I'd like to hear about it. ExxonMobil is the same huge oil company that had enough money to pay a $398 million retirement package to its outgoing CEO, Lee Raymond, just a few years ago. So this is a real struggling company. Make more profits than any company in the history of the world, paid its outgoing CEO $398 million in a retirement package, but they can't afford to pay a nickel in taxes. In fact, they get a tax refund. Do you think we need to change that system? I do. And ExxonMobil is the same company that is making its profits by gouging consumers at the pump, by charging higher and higher prices for gasoline, even when demand is low and supply is high. In Vermont, gas is now $2.85 a gallon. That has got to stop. This amendment would begin to make sure that ExxonMobil, BP, and other big oil companies pay at least a minimal amount of their record-breaking profits in taxes to the federal government so that we can begin to deal with our record-breaking deficit, so that we can begin the process of transforming our energy system. Mr. President, let me be clear. As millions of Americans have lost their jobs, their homes, their life savings, and their ability to send their kids to college because of this horrendous Wall Street recession, we cannot continue to allow big oil companies to make out like bandits. In the first quarter, and I refer people to this chart, in the first quarter of 2009, when our gross domestic product shrunk by 6.4% and overall corporate profits decreased by 5.25%. That's what a recession is about. Profits are down, overall corporate profits. The 5 largest oil companies were still able to earn over $13 billion in profits. And as this chart shows, during the last 10 years, the 5 largest oil companies, ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, Chevron, Texaco, and ConocoPhillips, earned over $750 billion in profits. 10-year period, $750 billion in profits. That is not chicken feed. During the first quarter of this year, Big Oil's profits increased by 85%. Not bad, 85%. Mr. President, instead of using these profits to invest in renewable energy and to prevent oil spills, big oil and gas companies are primarily using this money to buy back their own stock and enrich their CEOs. According to the American Petroleum Institute, between 2000 and 2007, the entire oil and gas industry, with all of their profits, remember, $750 billion in profits over the last 10 years, they invested only $1.5 billion in North American, quote, non-hydrocarbon investments, end quote, aimed at reducing the nation's dependence on oil. That's less than 0.25% of their profits during this time period. Meanwhile, the CEOs of big oil companies have received hundreds of millions in retirement packages and total compensation. Over the last 5 years, Ray Irani, the CEO of Occidental Petroleum, received over $725 million in total compensation. John Hess, the CEO of the Hess Oil Company, has received over $240 million in total compensation. David Lazar, the CEO of Halliburton, has received over $114 million in total compensation. James Mulva, the CEO of ConocoPhillips, has received over $95 million in total compensation, and Rex Tillerson, the CEO of ExxonMobil, made more than $30 million in total compensation over the 5-year period. Further, since 2002, the 5 largest oil companies have repurchased almost $270 billion of their own stock. And, Mr. President, it is important for the American people to understand how excessively we are subsidizing fossil fuels and benefiting big oil. So it's not only that they're making record-breaking profits. It is not only that they're not paying their fair share of taxes. It is not only that they're not investing in renewable energy so we can break our dependency on fossil fuel and clean up this planet, but in addition to that, they are receiving huge amounts of taxpayer subsidies. These guys who tell us how terrible the big government is, they are not hesitant to be running right here to Capitol Hill to get their fair share of their welfare payments. As this chart shows, according to the Environmental Law Institute, from 2002 to 2008, the United States government provided more than $70 billion in fossil fuel subsidies compared to just over $12 billion for wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, and other renewable energies, which in fact are the future of this country in terms of energy. Mr. President, this set of priorities is totally absurd. We have got to put an end to the outrageous tax breaks and subsidies that have been given to big oil and gas companies. But that, again, is not all that this amendment would do. It is not only $25 billion in deficit reductions. This amendment begins to move us away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and renewable energy by investing $10 billion into the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program. The stimulus package provided $3.2 billion for this highly successful program, and that money is filtering throughout 50 states in America. Hundreds and hundreds and thousands of communities are now making energy efficiency improvements in their town halls, in their schools, and they're moving towards sustainable energy as a result of this program. And we would put $10 billion more over a 5-year program, over a 5-year period, into a program which finally moves us away from fossil fuel to sustainable energy and energy efficiency. Let me give you an example of how this program is working. This program is helping to build wind turbines in Carmel, Indiana, to power its city sewer treatment plant. It is being used in Salt Lake City, Utah, to provide loans to businesses to make energy efficiency upgrades. It's being used in Columbus, Ohio, to make 29 public buildings more energy efficient. And I think, as everybody knows, the most significant thing that we can do today, the best return on our dollar, is energy efficiency. And that's what they're doing in Columbus, Ohio. That's what they're doing in Vermont. And that's what they're doing, in fact, all over this country as a result of programs like the Energy Efficiency Block Grant Program. It is being used in Portland, Maine, to retrofit 55 public buildings. It's being used in Miami, Florida, to convert landfill gas into the production of electricity. Methane gas out of rotting organic matter in a landfill provides electricity. What can be smarter than that? It's being used in New York City to help homeowners and businesses with energy efficiency and renewable energy loans, among many, many other projects we're seeing all over America. 50 states utilizing this program, young people getting involved and thinking about energy efficiency, sustainable energy. Mr. President, we need to keep these investments in energy efficiency and conservation going, and that is what this amendment does. Finally, Mr. President, this amendment would dedicate $25 billion for deficit reduction. At a time of record-breaking deficits and debt, we simply cannot continue to give oil and gas companies huge tax breaks. Mr. President, when it comes down to it, this amendment asks a very simple question. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Are you on the side of big oil and gas companies, or are you on the side of reducing the deficit, reducing our dependence on oil, saving consumers and businesses money on their energy bills, and saving the planet that we live on? And I would hope that most of our colleagues here are on the side of doing the right thing for the American people, and that's what this amendment is about. Mr. President, I understand that any time you stand up to big oil and the big gas companies, there's going to be a lot of political pushback. We know that since 1990, the oil and gas industry has made over $238 million in campaign contributions, and over the past 2 years alone, they spent over $210 million on lobbying. And with the BP disaster in the Gulf Coast, my guess is these guys are all over the place now lobbying and sending out their campaign contributions. But this amendment is the right thing to do, and it should bring together all of us who are concerned about transforming our energy system, all of us who are concerned about lowering our record-breaking deficit. So, Mr. President, I intend to be offering this amendment, and I look for widespread support on both sides of the aisle. And with that, I would yield the floor.